Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to Holy Rood Church. Welcome to the first session of Alpha for this term for kind of January 2021. Welcome to those of you who are joining online on Facebook as well. My name's Richard England. I'm the vicar here at Holy Rood, and between me and Beth Yendall and Dan Greenfield, we'll be hosting the course over the next few weeks. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, explain how Alpha works, and then we're going to plunge into our evening, our first session, if you like. So, a little bit of housekeeping. Obviously, we are now out of the Plan B restrictions in terms of, the COVID restrictions at the minute. So, because we're quite a small group here in the building, and it's quite a big space, it's actually up to you whether you wear your mask or not. Normally when we're here on a Sunday morning, because there's so many of us, we do ask people to, when they're standing up and walking around, put their mask on. But because there's quite a few of us and everything kind of gets lost up in the building, we could be a little bit more flexible on a Sunday evening. But obviously, you do what you need to do to make yourself feel comfortable and safe. That's absolutely fine. So the way that Alpha normally works is that Alpha is an introduction to the ideas at the heart of the Christian faith. And it's for people who would call themselves practicing Christians and would just want to kind of go round it all again. But it's equally all the way to people who think, I just don't know about any of this. This is just exploring and wondering, and I don't know where I'm going to end it, where it might take me. And it's for anyone in the middle. And I know some of you, I've met some of you just this evening. I know that, and for those of us who are joining online as well, I know that there'll be everybody on that range will be represented here this evening. And I want to reassure you that this is not a pressurized environment. Nobody is going to try and get something out of you that you are in any kind of way that would be kind of awful or anything like that. This is your own journey that you are on, which you need to take at your own pace. If you come one evening and say, "That's it, I've had enough. This is not for me," that is absolutely fine. No one is going to be upset with you. No one is going to be. We're just kind of glad that you came and gave it a go. And what will happen for those of us who are here in the building is that we will do 7 o'clock for just desserts. If you're on a diet, I apologize. It's not going to help for desserts. And then there'll be a presentation each evening on a different topic. They'll take us on a little bit of a journey, and then we'll finish those around about 8 o'clock. Have a quick comfort break, grab a cup of tea and coffee, and then you'll see 3 rings of chairs, and we'll go into a little bit of a group discussion time. That will normally last about 20 minutes, half an hour. Doesn't have to go on longer than feels natural, really. And it's the opportunity for you just to kind of work out your own thoughts and feelings about what you've just heard. There's no right or wrong answers. No one's going to try and trip you up. And it really is letting you make the journey at your own pace. For those of you who are joining online, it's a little bit more complicated. Once the bit in church here has finished, then the Facebook live stream will come to an end. And about 5 minutes after that, a group on Zoom will get started up, and you'll be able to join in with that group online. But once you've joined in, once you've got the code's not available publicly because it's not just a group that anyone from around the world can join in with. Can you imagine? So hopefully you've had the email by now, letting you know where it is. The email account is active right now. So if you want to email out, if you want to join in, you're like, is it too late to join in the Zoom group? It is not too late. You can email any time in the next 20 minutes, alpha@croftonparish.org.uk, and someone, probably Beth, will reply to your email and let you know how to join in with the Zoom code there this evening. Dan Greenfield is both babysitting at home and running the Zoom group tonight as well. So he's looking forward to seeing you join in with him a little bit later on. The modern world is a lot more complicated than it was like 2.5 years ago. But the great thing about having it both online and on site is that if for some reason, if you find yourself in a situation whereby you need to self-isolate or anything like that happens, but you still really want to join in, it's really easy. We can just switch you to the Zoom group. It's just really easy. So it's a good thing. It's just a little bit complicated. I think that's all the housekeeping. So let's make a start, shall we, on our journey over the next few weeks. We're going to run for 6 weeks altogether, 3 weeks, then take a break for half term, and then do 3 weeks. There's a Saturday morning session as well, which we'll tell you about a little bit later on as well. And really, over the next 6 weeks, we're simply going to spend time exploring the ideas and actually the person at the heart of Christianity. But what I wanted to do with you tonight is, for a few moments, think about the question, why do this? Why do this? I mean, loads of people don't. Loads of people just live their lives, get a job, fall in love or whatever, and kind of get to the end of their lives and never have kind of considered the bigger questions, the questions about whether there's a God, whether there's more to life than what we can see and touch and feel. So why do this? Why make the effort? Why come out on a Monday night? You could stay at home and watch Netflix. That would be okay. So why do this? And also, kind of, why do this? Why explore these questions in a church as opposed to anywhere else? What is it about exploring the ideas at the heart of the Christian faith that makes that particular avenue worth exploring? Why do this? So what I'd like to do with you this evening, if that's all right, is I would like to, as it were, take 3 steps along the path of why I think doing this is worth it. And hopefully you'll come along with me and you'll think, I'm not quite sure about all of it, but I'm kind of persuaded enough along these 3 steps to maybe think about taking the next one. Is that okay? We're going to take 3 steps along the path this evening. Now, is my clicker going to work? Let's have a look. Is it going to work? It's really not going to work. No. Okay, that's excellent. Beth is going to sit at my laptop and press a button while also answering emails on your own laptop and checking comments on Facebook, because that's the world we live in right now. So let's take 3 steps together this evening. Why do this? The first step I'd like us to think about is that to be human is to look for meaning in our lives beyond what we can simply see in the material world around us. To be human is to look for meaning in our lives. Somebody once told me that their philosophy on life, their worldview was that we were made to kind of procreate, pass on to the next generation, and that was it. That was it. Once you'd done that, your kind of role in life was over. That was your one purpose. And I understand that point of view. Unfortunately, that kind of makes us honestly, that makes us no different from the animal kingdom. That's what lions do. Lions sleep, eat, hunt, play, make more lions, and then they go round the process again. But that doesn't produce civilization. That doesn't produce art. The Sistine Chapel, the Mona Lisa, Taylor Swift's latest album. I'm currently listening to Folklore from 2020, if you're interested. It doesn't produce, there we are. It doesn't produce nuclear fission. It doesn't produce modern medicine. It doesn't produce the Industrial Revolution. It doesn't produce the things that you look at humanity and go, okay, there is something else going on than merely kind of procreating, getting ready for the next generation and just letting there, and that's it. We don't just function by instinct. We actually look for meaning. And often we seem to be so hardwired to try to seek meaning in our lives that many of us will look for it in the wrong places. We will look to try and find meaning in places where you could never find, a true purpose for your life. We plunge ourselves into our careers, we plunge ourselves into good things, into our careers, and then we get towards the end of it and we go, why do I not feel that has really summed up who I'm supposed to be as a person? We try and look for that one relationship. This is the movie's fault. The movies tell us that if you just find the one, then your life will make sense and everything that you are will get summed up in that relationship. But as you know, that puts quite a lot of pressure on that person, doesn't it? That poor person who has to somehow help you be that one thing. But we also know no relationship can bear the weight of that. And we know, don't we, that so many people have kind of plunged their lives into not good things, into terrible things, into serial relationships, into all sorts of addictive patterns of behavior because they were looking for something to give them a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose that they didn't seem able to find in the world around them. Somebody who really, I think, who kind of sums this up, in fact, in his own story, is this person here, who is the Russian writer Tolstoy. Now, I've talked about him before, so you may, if you're a regular around here, you may have heard me mention this. But Tolstoy is one of the greatest modern writers, certainly one of the greatest modern Russian writers. He lived in the 19th century, and his story is that he was born into the aristocracy in Imperial Russia. He was born into wealth. He had an amazing family home. As a young man, he fought in the Crimean War. He fought for his country with distinction. He returned to Moscow and was feted as a returning war hero. He was financially, wealthy and comfortable. He married, had a beautiful family, raised children, and then went on to become one of the greatest writers of his age, writing two of the novels that would be on the top 10 list of any of the modern Western literature, Anna Karenina, and the book that everybody owns but nobody's read, War and Peace. I have it on my Kindle. I have not read it. And yet, his autobiography, which is simply called A Confession, says that a question dogged him through the whole of his life, often pursuing him and sending him into fits of darkness and depression. And it was this question. It was the question of meaning. The question is this: what meaning has my life that the inevitability of death does not destroy? And we would say, Tolstoy, Tolstoy, what are you talking about? You're wealthy, you're married, you're an aristocrat, you've got this amazing family home, this kind of stately home that you live in, you're a fated war hero, and then not only that, you're one of the greatest writers of your age. They'll be talking about you in Stubbington 100 years after your death. You know the story of Tolstoy's death. He fell ill with pneumonia traveling on a train station. So this towering figure in Russia actually had to be taken off, and he died in the station master's house a couple of days after being taken off the train. And the story goes that nearly all of Russia kind of almost stopped for those few days while they were waiting for news about what was happening to Tolstoy as he finally came to the end. Come on, Tolstoy, if anyone's life had meaning, yours did. But that wasn't enough for him. He says he looked into logic and science and tried to find logical answers, and the only answer he got was, well, Tolstoy, the universe is a pretty big place. Someone like you was bound to come along somewhere, which, as you can imagine, he did not find a very satisfying answer. And having grown up in the very traditional Orthodox church in Russia, he knew he couldn't find any answers there. But actually, as a wealthy man, when he began to spend time among the peasant people, the poorest people in Russia, and their very simple Christian faith, that something began, a light turned on for him. And he began to realize that the meaning he was searching for, was something that he could only find in relationship with his Creator, in relationship with the one who had made him and knew him by name. So his autobiography is simply called A Confession, because it's not just his confession, his story of his life, but it's also his statement of faith. It's his story of the journey that he made, a journey that was all about looking for meaning, looking for purpose beyond what we can see and touch and feel in front of us. Archbishop Desmond Tutu died just before Christmas. You will probably be familiar with him. He's one of the towering figures of Christendom in the second half of the 20th century. And about 20 years ago, before 20 years ago, the Giles Brandreth, you know who Giles Brandreth is? Who's like the writer and was he a politician for a while? He was, I don't know, he did various different things. About 20 years ago, he was sent by a newspaper to go and interview Archbishop Tutu at Easter. This was just after everything had begun to change in South Africa, and so they wanted to know, the newspaper sent him, and they wanted to know what the Archbishop's Easter message would be that year as his country began this kind of transformative process. And so when Desmond Tutu died, Giles Brandreth on his blog republished the account that he wrote 20 years ago of what it was like for him to meet the famous Archbishop. And I wanted to just read to you a few sentences from the end of it. I'm going to just scroll down and make sure I get to the end of it. So Giles Brandreth is sitting there in South Africa, gets the Easter message, writes it down, and then he wrote this about what happens next. The Archbishop has finished his homily, but somehow he can sense that I am not wholly satisfied. He smiles. He recognizes a lapsed Anglican when he sees one. He leans toward me one last time, and in a voice barely above a whisper says, "You are like so many, my friend. You have everything. But inside, you feel there is something missing. Deep down, somewhere, it's not quite okay. Do not worry. Do not feel troubled. Do not be perplexed. God loves you as you are. With your doubts, with your intellectual reservations, with your inability to make the leap of faith, God says, I made you, actually, and I made you as you are because I love you." C.S. Lewis says, when we find within ourselves a longing for meaning that the world around us cannot satisfy, we can only conclude it is because we were made for something that cannot be found in the world around us. If there were no such thing as donuts, nobody would wake up in the morning and think, what I really want today is a donut. If there were no such thing as something beyond us, it would not be human to long for that sense of meaning and purpose. So where does that come from? That's my first question. Here's the second one. That was the long one. The next two are a little bit quicker, I promise. So the second one is this. Is there more to life than what we can see and touch and feel? Is there more to reality than just the material world? Now we live in, like Madonna says, we are living in a material world, and I am not a material girl, but you know where we are here at this. And she kind of nails it she kind of nails it. She nails the journey that we've made, particularly in Western society, from a sense that the world has got multiple layers to it, that there's what we can see and touch and feel, and yet there's lots of other things going on. We've kind of moved away from that to a world in which the only thing that matters is what can be measured. And if you can't measure it, if you can't touch it and feel it, then how can we really know if it's important, if it matters? And that's the kind of the majority worldview in which we find ourselves today. 100 years or so ago, it would have been very, very different. The majority worldview in this country would have been, well, of course, there is more to reality than what we can see and touch and feel. But we have shifted such a long way in such a short period of time. And so we now have huge questions. We now have huge suspicions about the spiritual, about the supernatural, about whether there's anything else out there. And we kind of go, well, you can't see it, you can't measure it, you can't put it in a lab. And, so how can we know whether it's true or not? The problem for that is that it doesn't really describe the majority of human experience, actually. It doesn't really describe the majority of human experience. It doesn't really describe the majority of human experience in the world today. Go to most other countries in the world and they will look at you like you're mad. What are you talking about? Of course there is more to what the reality than what we can see and touch and feel. And actually, certainly you look back in history and people who were just as intelligent as we are, just as clever, just as educated as we are, would just simply have seen the world the different way. And it also doesn't describe human experience, because all sorts of interesting things happen to people. I would like to read you a quick story, which is the story written by the Catholic writer Janet Soskis, who is a Canadian, and wrote for The Guardian in 2009 about her own kind of story of discovery. And what I love about her story, which I think she tweeted before Christmas or something like that, I don't quite know why she put it out there again, but even though she wrote it in 2009, I just picked it up before Christmas. What I loved about this story is that it is really boring. It's really boring. This is a really boring story of somebody kind of beginning to wonder whether there is more to life than just what she can touch and feel. So I hope you'll indulge me just for a few minutes. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs of her story. So she says this. She says, "I can remember being an atheist, or perhaps an agnostic, for in those days I did not think much about God one way or another. I knew that at that time there were Christians, and I suppose adherents to other faiths, whose adherence I judged ethnic, and thus not applicable to my own instance. As for Christians, I assumed they came in two sorts: those who went along for a sense of belonging or from a sense of nostalgia, rather like attending a bridge club or square dancing, and evangelicals, who were clearly undereducated and overexcited." Thank you so much. "I can remember from my lofty 21-year-old height of wisdom thinking that it must be soothing to be one of the latter, all of whose problems in life could be seen to be answered. In my assumed clarity about religion, I in fact knew nothing about it at all. And in my own case, it was only dramatic conversion which turned me round and put my feet on a slower, steadier, more modest path into a truth whose depths are fathomless. In my own case, faith came from a dramatic religious experience. It was not theatrically dramatic. I was not rescued from shipwreck by passing dolphins, or saved from falling to my death off a cliff face by a gracefully placed vine. Nevertheless, it was dramatic to me. I was in the shower on an ordinary day and found myself to be surrounded by a presence of love. A love so real and so personal that I could not doubt it. I had not, as far as I know, been looking for God, or thinking of God, or enjoyed a particularly good or especially bad day, although at a later date my friends gently, one by one, took me aside to say that although they did not wish in any way to appear to discredit my experience, I had at the time of this momentous shower been either thus or so, happy or depressed. Their various explanations were conflicting. As for me, I could not doubt the reality of that loving presence, and still cannot. I now know that one-off religious experiences of this sort are rather frowned upon by the best theologians. And if I have my life to live over, I will try to have a higher class of conversion experience. But this is what happened to me. I was turned around, converted. Not that I'd been the sort of person who kicked old ladies and found myself now helping them across the street. I was much the same person, but facing in a new direction. I love it because it's so kind of boring and kind of like she got into a shower, one person, and got out, another person. And the problem for where we are at this moment in time is that we can't really put that into a box. You can't measure that. You can't put that in a lab or put it on you can put it on trial, but you can't measure it. You can't see how long or short or high or deep it was. And yet for Janet, that moment transformed the entire direction of her life. She's now a theologian and professor. A philosopher. You can look her up online. You can read what she's written over many, many years. And actually, people like that have experiences every day. That's perfectly normal, part of what it means to be human. And so when we kind of reduce everything down to the only thing that matters is what can be measured, actually what we kind of lose may be more than what we're left with. And what about those things that matter that can't be measured? How do you measure justice? How do you measure hope? How do you measure those things? In fact, yet we have things in our world that we know matter and yet can't be measured. One last question. Final question for us. What happens to us when we die? What happens to us at the end? This is not a question we like talking about in this country, because we kind of have this idea that we kind of don't really often treat the idea of death as an interruption in our lives. We like to imagine that everybody's kind of born and it's okay and nothing terrible happens at that end, and then you kind of grow up and you have a happy life and you have a job and you meet someone nice, and maybe there are some bumps along the way, but you kind of get through okay, and then you get into your 50s and 60s and things become a little bit more iffy, and we get that, but that hopefully we all get to our 70s or 80s and we get to kind of say goodbye at the end, surrounded by our loved ones, and we kind of, almost as it were, kind of blink out, and yet we kind of can be okay with that, because it comes not as a welcome guest, but as the proper end to a full and happy life. And so we kind of don't worry about it too much, and we maybe have some thoughts about heaven, and maybe that we don't quite know where they come from, but everyone seems to think it's a thing, so that sounds nice, and we'll go along with that. But sometimes death isn't the natural end of a fulfilled life. Sometimes it is a profoundly awful, life-altering disruption, and it doesn't feel right. It feels wrong. And we are suddenly forced to confront the fact that we don't really know how to categorize any of that stuff. Those of you that know, that live locally will know that we had to do that last term. And I had to do that last term because I had to conduct the funeral of a 10-year-old girl. And it was not okay. It was just not okay. And those of you that live locally will know a little bit of Sophie's story. And she was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer at the age of 9. They were part of our church here. She was a regular here on Sunday morning. And just over a year and a bit later, it was, we were taking her funeral after the cancer aggressively returned over the summer. And I found myself, we had 2,500 people watching online, let alone the 300 people that we had in the building. I had more children under the age of 12 than I've ever had at a funeral. Suddenly we had to talk about stuff that we don't talk about very often to young people and young children. And it forces us, moments like that force us to ask difficult questions. They force us to ask this question that we are quite good at putting off, putting away. Although I suspect within a group like this, some of us will have been through experiences where we simply weren't able to do that. Death intruded in on our lives, or grief, or something else that spun us out in a way that we simply couldn't kind of mentally and emotionally file and get on with. So what do we offer to this? What answers do we find for this? Is this it? Are you just you, and then you're gone, and you're not around anymore? Is that it? What makes you you? Is it your physicality, so that when your physicality is gone, you're not you anymore? I mean, I suppose we all look different, but broadly we're all the same, aren't we? I mean, we've got 2 legs and 2 arms, and most of us, and some of us have got more hair than the others, and all of that. But we're broadly all the same, and yet somehow every single one of us is completely and utterly unique. Every single person, something about them as a person. What do we call that? Do we call that soul? Do we call it spirit? Does it just go? The sense of who you are? How do we answer that question? Everyone gets uncomfortable when we talk about it, so we'll move on really, really quickly. But these are the questions that bring us to points like this. These are often the questions that will get people on a journey where you end up at something like Alpha, and you think, And there is what does the next? I can't remember what the next slide says. There is the answer. The answer is not quite the right word, but the path that we're going to consider is not just a set of ideas, not just a set of ideas that lie at the heart of the Christian faith, but the answers we're going to consider all revolve around a person, the person of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And I just want to offer you this for one thing that Jesus said, which is from John 14, verse 6. He was recorded as saying it on the night before his crucifixion, where he simply says, it's one of the most famous phrases, you may well have heard it before if you've been around in church before, which is, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And in some ways, he speaks to the questions that we answered. How do I find meaning and purpose? Well, I'm the way. And it's not just that he gives us a way, it's that he is the way. He doesn't just say, go off and go and do that. He says, let me be the way, not just point you to the way. How do we know what's real? How do we know whether there's more to life than what we can see and touch and feel? Well, he says, I am the truth. And that word truth, we tend to think of it as what you think within your head. But it means really, I am the reality. I am the way things really are. Let me show you the way things really are. Let me help you discover the possibility that there is more to life than what we can see and touch and feel. And then at the end, he simply says, and I am the life. Because if there is one who is not bound by time and space, there is one who is not bound by life and death, then there is the possibility that there is one who can say to us, even at the end of all things, even at the end of your story, I am the one in whom you can trust to journey with beyond that. What an arrogant thing to say. I mean, how can anyone make a series of claims like that? I mean, if I wandered up to you on a Monday morning and said, you know what? I am the way, the truth, and the life. You'd be phoning the hospital and seeing if you could get me sectioned. And you'd be right to do so because I am just a very ordinary person. So how on earth could we know whether this person could make these claims? And how on earth could we know whether those claims are true? Well, to find the answer to that, I'm afraid you're going to have to come back next week. Thank you so much for your attention this evening. Thank you so much for those of you who've been joining with us online. What's going to happen now is that we're going to take a break just for 5 minutes. If you need to go and take a comfort break, you're really welcome to do that. And there will be some tea and coffee available at the back. If you're online, the stream will come to an end in just a second, and you'll have 5 minutes or so before you go and join in with the Zoom room. We really hope you enjoy doing that, and we will see you again next Monday night for our next Alpha session. Great. For those of us in the building, Beth is going to tell us